Well, anybody who's watching this, welcome to my reaction to professional wrestling is stupid and beautiful and I love it. It's this one of the video that was kind of recommended, but more suggested in the person's own words. Do not attack me. By Ain Sof. That name is spelled in Russian, so I assume the person is Russian, while the comment was written in quite good English. Which is rare to see, even from people who speak English first as a first language. So that's a thing. Before we start, I wanted to say that was recommend. I created a post where you can recommend me videos, so you can check that on the community tab. I think I'll appreciate that if you recommend me something there. Also, still you can use the donation link in the description below if you want. I'll appreciate it a lot, and I'll get to it. I'll definitely get to it, and it will be much faster than through just comments. Another thing is that I create. I guess I'll say it about on the next few videos, but a few weeks ago I created a poll even, where I asked if I should post my VODs from streaming on Twitch to the channel. There are only, I think, about 30 votes on it, but majority says yes, but I would appreciate if more people would vote on it, and so I can properly decide if I should or shouldn't. And now let's start.
Okay, I'm guessing right about now, a lot of you are wondering why the hell a video...
Oh yeah. And I'm watching, there were multiple videos suggested, but I'm watching this one because I do watch wrestling. Well, WWE only. From wrestling. I also watch MMA in UFC and Bellator and a little bit here and there. But I watch wrestling more or less weekly.
Video about wrestling is showing up in your subscription feed, and I get it, wrestling is totally not for everybody, but it's also April 1st, which means your timeline is probably filled with April Fool's Day videos.
Oh wow, 2018,
and rather than add another to the pile, I thought I'd take this opportunity.
Also, the video is made by Super Eyepatch Wolf. I keep forgetting saying that because I react to the same channel over and over again, and it's kind of understandable.
And do something a
it's also in the title.
And talk about a form of entertainment I've loved for basically my entire life. And if you hate professional wrestling, if you're wondering why I would debase myself covering such a ridiculous subject clearly aimed at children, well, first off, I have some bad news for you about the rest of this channel, and second, you are actually the person I'm making this video for. My goal here isn't to turn you into a wrestling fan, just to try and help you understand why so many people are.
Who don't watch.
And understanding the world around us is a good thing, right? Even the parts of it that seem really dumb and insane, right?
Oh my god.
Right. Okay, elephant in the room, wrestling is fake. And no, not even in the way Game of Thrones is fake. Professional wrestling is a pretend sport masquerading as a real one. These two women are not actually fighting, these two men do not actually hate each other, and this is not an actual evil voodoo priest named Papa Shango, it's Charles Wright, who's also played the role of a salty martial artist and a jovial pimp. And he, alongside an entire industry of his fellow wrestlers, all work together as a highly choreographed physical theater, the goal of which is to convince the audience that what they are seeing is an actual competitive event. This is the sticking point with a lot of people in wrestling, the idea that it's fake and not a legitimate sport, thus devaluing it as a piece of entertainment. But to me, wrestling isn't devalued by the fact that it's fake, rather it's fascinating because of it. And through this, in a very strange way that I'm going to explain by the end of this video, can also be more real than virtually anything else on television. The revelation that wrestling is fake is not a new one, not by a long shot. It was in 1938 that North American newspapers stopped reporting the results of pro wrestling because at that point, journalists had become wise to the idea that the results of these matches were predetermined.
Yeah.
Up until this point, wrestling had mainly been a sideshow at carnivals, but that changed when wrestling bookers learned two things. The first was that the sport was a lot more profitable for them if they could decide the outcome, but second, it was also a lot more entertaining for the audience. As rather than the matches being just a pure contest of strength and skill, where the winner could have all the potential charisma and charm of a bag of wet chalk,
show.
they could instead engage the crowd
Yeah.
with heroes and villains and create rivalries and
Yeah,
storylines
heels
around
and
them,
faces.
which would keep the
Poor-
audience coming back week
poor
after
guy.
week. This would also skyrocket wrestling's popularity in the early days of television, turning what had started as a carny show into a national obsession, which also meant that now maintaining the illusion that wrestling was real was more critical than ever, and this is what led to the implementation of kayfabe. Kayfabe was originally a code word wrestlers used to signal to each other that there were fans or outsiders nearby, and so the illusion of wrestling would need to be maintained. But in a much broader sense, it's a term used to refer to the portrayal of stage events as real, and specifically
You can say
of
just
wrestling
it's
as a
acting,
legitimate
it's a
contest, and
acting
wrestling
as a character
personas
you
as
are on the
actual
ring.
people and real competitive athletes, meaning that wrestlers were expected to play
God
their
told us.
fictional wrestling personas whenever they were out
He
in
was my
public.
hero.
And so heroic wrestlers known as faces were
Bret Hart.
expected to be friendly and kind to their
Cena.
fans, while villainous wrestlers known as heels were instructed to be unpleasant and antagonistic, and above all else, faces and heels were never ever to be
That
seen
shit,
together
man.
in public, as
Far
doing
away
so
from
would
the
give
face.
way that the rivalry between the two was fabricated, thus exposing the secret reality of the business. The illusion of kayfabe was fiercely maintained even well into the 90s. It was what allowed fans to let themselves believe that wrestling was real, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. As a wrestling
Yeah.
fan, people were always eager to tell you that it was fake, but it was
Yes.
always easy to dismiss
would-
because it always came from people
That's kind of the first thing people go to when, like, you say, "Oh, I watch wrestling," and then people like, "Do you know it's fake?" Yes. You have to be probably blind. No offense to blind people, but you have to be probably blind to not see that it's fake.
that disliked wrestling. But then, one fateful night on May 19th, 1996, an incident would occur that would destroy the illusion of wrestling, and it was an incident known as the Curtain Call. The Curtain Call took place right in the center of Madison Square Garden, and it involved a group of 4 wrestlers who shared an off-camera friendship and were known backstage as the Clique: Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Shawn Michaels, and Paul Levesque. This was the last night Hall
he
and
was still
Nash
Paul
would be
Levesque.
performing under the banner of
Oh no,
WWF,
just his real
and
name.
the following day would be jumping ship to rival company WCW. Michaels and Nash were bitter rivals in WWF's storyline at this point, and in the final match of the night, Michaels was set to defeat Nash in a steel cage match. But what wasn't part of the script was what came after the match's conclusion when the cameras stopped rolling, when Michaels straddled his unconscious opponent and revived him with a Snow White-esque kiss. Fans looked on, bewildered and stunned, and then, to add to the confusion, Hall and Levesque both came to the ring, and the 4 friends celebrated an emotional farewell. The problem, though, was that this was not part of the WWF canon
Is Kevin
story.
okay?
Not only did these 4 wrestlers not have an on-camera friendship, they were meant to actively despise one another, with Hall and Michaels both being beloved faces and Nash and Levesque loathed heels. But if that was true, then why were they all in the ring hugging and celebrating? Were these guys actually friends? Oh my god. The incident never aired on national television, but it didn't matter. The advancement of home camcorder technology alongside the rise of the internet meant that the footage was captured by fans and free to rampage across the World Wide Web, and the result was that the illusion of kayfabe that professional wrestling had shrouded itself in for so many years was left tattered and broken, with wrestling
And
audiences
I
around
think
the
it's
world
good.
faced with the now undeniable fact that wrestling was fake, and underneath the facade lay a separate reality, a reality that lay just below the surface, tantalizingly out of sight.
Take care.
This is what would lead to the
Yeah.
modern era of pro
Hello
wrestling.
there.
To wrestling fans now, the secret that wrestling is scripted is not
I
a
hate this
secret.
2018.
Instead, what we have now is a form of entertainment that exists in two separate realities: the fictional
Yes.
world of kayfabe and the actual real-life business and politics behind it. Which leaves us with the question: if wrestling is fake and that knowledge is widely known, then what then is the appeal of it? If someone wants to watch a
Oh, hey, Tony. Who's the... Oh, the son. The son, yes. Is that how you say his name? Ferguson wins anyway. Uh... Wrestling is just acting. It's like if stuntmen, like stunt doubles, would start acting and then they would be the focus of a movie. That's what it is. There's still people like backstage and stuff like that. They could be friends, they not necessarily are, but there could be friends. Also, they could hate each other, but in the end of the day, when they come out before the public, Mike doesn't pick it up, but there's some shitty music playing outside. It's just, this is what it is, whatever.
genuine contest of skill and strength, then why not just go watch UFC? And the answer to that lies in the fundamental
Showmanship.
difference between the
Well,
two.
no, that's
That
not
this is a
what it is.
competition and this is a story. Wrestling,
Yes,
like so many
it's
other
story
forms of
driven.
fiction, is about telling stories.
It's at
I
least
want you to look at these clips and forget for
kind
a
of.
moment that you're watching wrestling.
It's kind of
Just
shit
try and
nowadays.
imagine your own body performing these maneuvers.
Yeah.
Think about the years of training it would take to be able to move like this, and about the timing and trust you need to have in another person to execute these sequences. And ask yourself, what is all that effort for? What is actually being achieved here? And the answer is that they're building a narrative through the suspension of disbelief. The suspension of disbelief is the simultaneous belief in two inconsistent things. Anyone who watches The Matrix believes both that we're watching a fight between Neo and Morpheus, but is aware that we're actually watching Keanu Reeves and Lawrence Fishburne
Yes, it's this,
perform a
like,
choreographed sequence of
wrestling is the
actions
same
being
thing.
shot on
Watching
a
wrestling
film
is the same
set.
thing as watching
And
a
it's
movie
the filmmaker's
or
job
playing
to
a
make it
game.
as easy on the audience as possible to
try to get
suppress
lost
that
in
second
that.
idea, which is why solid acting, writing, and
Just
editing
based
is
more on
so
the reality.
important. Because a discrepancy in any particular one could break the audience's immersion, destroying our investment in the story. But immersion is also something that's created in very different ways in different forms of art. Take the far simpler medium of Rakugo. Rakugo is a minimalist form of Japanese theater involving a single actor kneeling on stage, whose only props are a fan and a piece of cloth. And with this ultra-minimalist setup, they play out entire stories, even embodying multiple characters, using subtle gesturing and posing along with tonal inflection to convey different people. And so the immersion, the suspension of disbelief, is created purely through the physical performance of the actor. A skilled rakugo can make it feel like an actual story with a full cast of characters is playing out in front of us, despite the fact we can very clearly see it's just one person kneeling on stage. Wrestling works the exact same way. Just like
Shinsuke,
film,
that's
just
the
like
thing.
Rakugo, what the performers are ultimately trying to do is make us believe that what we're seeing is real. And not only just in the staged violence, but also by embodying these characters and their emotions. One of the things I love about Kaneko Arai, real name to former NXT Women's Champion Asuka, is that from the moment she steps out into an arena, everything from her wardrobe to the way she walks to how she plays with the camera embodies this fascinating fictional character, a bizarre, violent person who
right
takes
in my face,
distinct
but-
glee in breaking her opponents apart. And because of how good Arai is at conveying this character both through her wrestling and the subtlety of her actions, you don't see the actual performance behind it. You just see Asuka, the Empress of Tomorrow. This is something that all great
There he
wrestlers
is.
do. The embodiment of a fictional persona, a character. And so, all a wrestling match is what happens when two of these fictional characters meet at particular points in their lives, and the story that unfolds through that. Granted, that might sound a little weighty, so to show this, I'd like to use an example from a match from WrestleMania 8 in the form of Rowdy Roddy Piper versus Bret the Hitman Hart.
Okay.
Piper was the defending Intercontinental Champion, a fan favourite, and the far more
face,
experienced of the
in other
two,
words.
while Hart was the rising new star of the company. And just watch the story that plays out between these two characters. From the outset, Piper is consistently out-wrestled by Hart, having each throw and hold countered and turned back on him, to the point that it's obvious that he cannot beat Hart in a technical wrestling match, at which point Piper changes tactics.
Actually happens a lot when in the beginning somebody will be losing badly, but then they will win in the end. It's kind of, at this point, feels
Pretending
kind
to
of
show
lazy.
respect to Hart to lower his guard before blindsiding him with a brutal closed fist attack, and begins to
Oh.
decimate his younger opponents with a string of
Heel
vicious
turn?
illegal assaults. Until finally, Hart, now bloody and battered, rallies, gaining a read on his opponents once again and countering everything Piper can throw at him. Until finally, Piper, left with no other option, knocks the referee unconscious and grabs hold of the ring bell, and is about to use it to put his younger opponent away once and for all. But then there's just this beautiful little moment where Piper just stops and looks at the sea of people surrounding him and is left awash in a chorus of boos,
That can't
the
happen
fans
now, there are monitors
disgusted
only.
by his actions. He used to be the hero in these situations. These used to be his fans. And in this moment of realization, he throws away the bell, and the crowd explodes at this subtle act of redemption. Before finally, Piper is outdone one last time, accepts his defeat with grace, passing both the torch and his title to the newer generation.
Wow, blood on
There
in
is so
WWE.
much to this match. It's
That's
basically an
definitely long
entire
ago.
fallen hero / villain redemption story arc told in 16 minutes without any dialogue.
Man,
Purely
yeah, it's almost
conveyed
30 years
through
ago.
physical storytelling of both wrestlers. And I think that's kind of incredible. From here, Piper's career would start to fade, and Bret, after years of success, would eventually find himself in a match where the roles were reversed, where now he was the veteran the crowd had turned against as he faced off against the new rising star of the company, Stone Cold Steve Austin. This is what professional wrestling is, and while it's not always good or
Laziness.
even socially
Using
acceptable,
the same
when it's at its
things.
best,
Oh,
it can be
goddammit, Taker.
exciting to funny to even occasionally genuinely heartbreaking.
Oh yeah.
And the knowledge that these events are scripted for me doesn't take anything away from the emotional impact they have, in the same way that knowing Yusuke versus Toguro is just a bunch of cells being photographed in rapid succession doesn't take away from the emotional impact of that. Okay,
Yu Yu Hakusho?
everything we just talked about, that's all the
Yu Yu
kayfabe
Hakusho? I
side
can
of
remember.
wrestling, the fictional performance created by the wrestlers and writing staff. But as we mentioned earlier, there is another side to wrestling, and that's the actual reality behind it. When you begin to look into the industry of pro wrestling for long enough, a strange thing starts to happen, and that is that the line between what's real and what isn't gradually begins to blur. And you begin to see moments when the fictional world of kayfabe and the actual reality of the business begin to bleed into one another. And
Yeah.
identifying the point where one starts and the other ends becomes nearly impossible. And to show this, we need to go back to the curtain call.
Okay, before we go back, it's a thing because the winner is predetermined. The writers make a story and all that, and they say who wins, who loses. Then that's being told to a wrestler, and they might not like it. They might think, oh, I think my character is supposed to go this way. Then like win here instead of losing, and I will either have to change that, have to change the story, or Vince McMahon will probably say, no, I like him more, so he wins. That's how. Something like that happens nowadays, I'm not
The
sure.
curtain call and its shattering of kayfabe was
No,
seen
it's
by
not.
many of the wrestlers and staff
It's
within the
like getting
WWF
worse and
as an
worse.
appalling attack on wrestling. And so there had to be punishment. Someone had to pay the price for this transgression. It couldn't be either Scott Hall or Kevin Nash, as they had both already left the company. And it couldn't be Shawn Michaels, because he, at the time, was the current WWF champion, and already a problem in many other areas.
No way, it was
And so the
he
entirety
punished?
of the blame fell on Paul Levesque, an upper mid-card wrestler with a lot
Hunter
of potential who seemed bound for
Helmsley?
greatness.
Something?
And as punishment, his entire career was derailed. And he found himself at the bottom of the card once again, being forced to endure a string of humiliating losses in matches that showed him as weak and ineffective, with other wrestlers shrugging off his attacks and quickly and easily defeating him. Writing like
Ultimate
this
Warrior.
is devastating to a wrestler's career. It destroys the fictional
that's-
credibility a wrestling persona has with the
that's on the
audience,
finisher, is
and
it?
therefore
It's a
severely
bullshit move.
damages their ability to draw a crowd and thus earn a living wage. But this was the new reality that Levesque now faced. None of this was part of the actual WWF storyline or even mentioned on TV.
Hunter Howard
From the
Helmsley?
audience's perspective, all that was
Helmsley?
happening was Levesque was a wrestler who used to win a lot
Remember
and then
Triple H.
suddenly stopped. Now, let's take a moment that came 4 years later. At this point, Levesque had sweat and bled his way back to the top of the card and had been
Yeah, look at him, he's
reborn as
more
title
beefy now.
contender Triple H. And in an interview
There
that was
it is.
meant to be kayfabe, that was meant to be scripted, this happened.
Hey, watch your language.
What, you want me to shoot with this interview? I'm gonna shoot with it. It's about 4 years ago, Madison Square Garden. I walked to the ring to say goodbye to my friends, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Shawn Michaels. Who got punished for that, JR? Well, you know what? That makes me sick in my stomach. Every time I look at you guys, it makes me sick to think what you did to me, holding me back. You guys talk about being students of the game. I am the game, JR.
That's
There
his
is
name.
nobody that eats, sleeps, or breathes this business more than me.
The thing to note here is that he's referring to events that never took place in the fictional WWF storyline. He's referring to things that really happened, and so
Yeah?
ask yourself, who is actually speaking here? Is it the fictional wrestling persona Triple H?
No,
Or is it
obviously
the
not.
actual human being behind the persona, Paul Levesque?
Yes.
The person who had to actually endure the ire of WWF management for years
Yeah,
and
and he's
nearly saw
pissed.
his career ruined. And the answer
Of
is
course,
that
if
it's
he's
both.
over it now.
It's both Triple H and Paul Levesque. And the result is that there's an honesty and an anger that's genuinely captivating as the reality starts to fuel the fiction. And there are dozens of incidents like this that have taken place throughout the years of wrestling. The Montreal Screwjob, the forced retirement and recent return of Daniel Bryan, and possibly, most infamously, the CM Punk
Wait,
years of wrestling. The Montreal Screwjob,
I heard about that, I'm not sure what happens there.
the forced retirement and recent return of Daniel Bryan,
Recent return? 2018? Oh, maybe not as a fighter, but like he got, was it neck injury, I think? He can't fight until 2020 came along or something like that, and he came back, and now it's May 2021, and he's gone again? But it's kind of story-wise. He lost a fight, so and the stakes for the fight was where if he lost, he leaves, he retires. I'm not sure. I'm not watching closely enough. I'm just watching some fights, hoping they're good, but they're mostly not. I'm kind of rooting for people I already know. I've been watching wrestling for years, and I'm disappointed in the state that it is now.
and possibly most infamously
Pipe bomb?
the CM Punk pipe bomb, in which former wrestler CM Punk took to a mic and verbally rendered the entire WWE, laying waste to the management, his fellow wrestlers, and even his own fans.
I'm barely promoted. I don't get to be in movies. I'm certainly not on any crappy show on the USA Network. But the fact that Dwayne is in the main event of WrestleMania next year and I'm not makes me sick.
I can see that.
Let me get something straight. Those of you who are cheering me right now, you are just the biggest part of me leaving as anything else. You're the ones that buy those programs that my face isn't on the cover of, and then at 5 in the morning at the airport, you try to shove it in my face so you can get an autograph and try to sell it on eBay.
This to me is what's so uniquely captivating about wrestling. Out of all forms of entertainment, in no other is the
Like, that was kind of a stupid move to do the pipe bomb there, because it could have been very bad for him. I don't know, he possibly could have been just sued over it. Unless he was, I'm not sure. Because it was like 2012. But then, what happened? Why did he leave WWE after being in the wrestling business for about 20 years? And decided, oh, I'm gonna do UFC. Did he fall and hit his head on something way too many times? That was the stupidest decision he could have made, and then he did it again.
The line between fiction and reality so delicate and malleable, where the fourth wall is so fragile, and when it does finally give way, it can lead to some of the most intense and oddly sincere storytelling in any form of entertainment.
I'm sure that's
As
about
fake
me
as
and
wrestling
Brian.
can be, these are the moments when it becomes shockingly real. These moments show something else also, and that is that at its heart, wrestling is just a story about people. No matter how theatrical
True.
a wrestling
Okay.
persona is, at its core, it's just a person. One as real and flawed as anyone else. And when you start to watch wrestling for long enough, it's the stories of these people that become the main draw as you watch them grow and age and change. So to conclude this video, I want to talk about one of these stories.
Undertaker is the saddest thing.
I want to talk about the saga of the Golden Lovers. Our story begins in 2008 as two
Excuse me?
young wrestlers wage war on one another. The
Oh, I think I've
first
seen
is
moments from this
Kota
one.
Ibushi, a young, supremely talented Japanese wrestler who seems bound for greatness.
Yeah?
And the other is Kenny Omega,
Oh,
a Canadian
yes.
wrestler who, after seeing tapes of
I know
Ibushi's matches, felt destined to face him. And so he issued an open challenge to Kota, which Ibushi accepted, and so Omega traveled to Japan and a showdown took place that was messy, brutal, and mesmerizing. Ibushi eventually took the victory, but it didn't matter. Over the course of the match, the two wrestlers realized something. There was a connection here. Both wrestlers believed
Yeah, they
that wrestling
seem to have
could be
good
more than
energy.
just wrestling. It could be a vehicle for comedy, a way to tell stories, hell, it could even be art. And together, the two resolved to change the world of wrestling. Omega uproots his entire life and moves to Japan to be closer to Ibushi. And rather than become rivals, they form a tag team, initially being pitched as the Golden Brothers, but Omega and Ibushi prefer the name the Golden Lovers. The Golden
Oh.
Lovers are on a level
That's
few
why,
other
okay.
tag teams can even approach. There's a kinship and a
missed.
synchronicity here that fuels their matches. But what's more, they seem genuinely delighted to be around each other, both in the ring and outside it.
Poor
And that
crowd.
chemistry shows in their exceptional teamwork and performances, with the Japanese
That's Finn
audience
Balor.
embracing them
Fuck my ass.
wholeheartedly as they capture multiple tag titles. And by 2011, it feels like their dream is beginning to come true. The Golden Lovers are inseparable, and they are changing the face of
Oh
wrestling.
no, and
But
the writer's gonna
slowly,
come
a
in?
gap starts to form between the two. While Kota only needs to rely on his God-given natural talents, Kenny often struggles, having to work hard to overcome his own weakness and to keep pace with Ibushi, and he starts to feel outpaced by his genius partner. Kota's genius doesn't go unnoticed either. He's being given more opportunities as a single wrestler, and what's
Oh,
more,
that's not good.
he's winning. And with each
For a tag
victory,
team.
Kenny feels a little more left behind. And so on August 18th, 2012, after 3 years of partnership, the two face each other. And what follows is one of the most spectacular matches in history. Kota fighting for his pure love of wrestling, and Kenny desperately battling as to not be left behind by the person he cares about the most. But it's not enough. He cannot overcome the genius of Ibushi. And
I think he's
afterwards,
younger.
both wrestlers look
He looks
devastated.
that way.
Kenny for the loss, and Kota for having inflicted it upon him. Over the next 2 years, the gap between the two would only continue to widen. Ibushi continues to rise, even going so far as to face the legendary King of Strong Style, Shinsuke
Oh,
Nakamura.
hell yeah.
But meanwhile, Kenny struggles without his former partner, gaining only modest wins and racking up several major losses,
Not against Finn.
including one especially crushing defeat at the hands of Prince Devitt, a member of
that's
the
his name,
villainous Bullet Club,
Bullet Club,
a
yeah.
vicious faction of American wrestlers who spit
AJ
in the
Styles,
face
yeah.
of Japanese
Forgot.
pro wrestling, overwhelming opponents with their superior numbers and brutal tactics. And the experience changes Omega. He can't help feel that now, without Ibushi by his side, he is alone. But Devitt has an entire army of allies behind him. And so a
Baby
realization
metal.
dawns on him. Maybe with the Bullet Club, he could finally become strong enough to stand as an equal with Ibushi. And so 2 weeks later, he emerges as their newest member. And it works. He wins and he keeps winning. Until the day finally comes when his mentor and leader of the Bullet Club, AJ Styles, faces Kota for the IWJP Heavyweight Championship.
Oh.
In typical Bullet Club fashion, Kenny was expected to sabotage Ibushi, but he can't. He holds back for the entire match until its final moments, when Ibushi scales the turnbuckle and is seconds from victory, only to turn his head and see Kenny standing on the ring apron, and the two lock eyes. And Kenny becomes paralyzed between his loyalty for the Bullet Club and his feelings towards his former partner, and so fails to act. But this momentary distraction is just enough time for Styles to recover, and he
Oh, Styles
counters
push.
Ibushi's attack for a crushing comeback defeat. Afterwards, Omega is visibly shaken, while Ibushi lies devastated both by the loss and the betrayal of his former partner. Not long after, Ibushi disappears from the Japanese wrestling scene, while
Oh.
Omega only continues to grow more ruthless,
Did he
vicious, and
win against
victorious.
Shinsuke?
And he begins to dominate New Japan, shrouding himself in the indestructible armor of the Bullet Club, and
At
even
what cost?
deposing Styles as its leader, taking the crown for himself. This new invincible Kenny Omega even makes it to the very final of the G1 Climax, the most elite wrestling tournament in the entire world. But his
Wow.
conquest has taken its toll, and he enters the match battered and exhausted, facing the immovable and dangerous Hiroki Goto, who punishes Omega again and again, constantly pushing him to the brink of defeat. And as the light of victory begins to fade away, Omega reaches deep down inside himself, and what he finds is his old partner Ibushi, whose finisher, the Shining Star Powerbomb, he uses in a final sequence of moves to overcome
I
Goto
love that
and
finisher.
take the
Damn,
win.
yeah.
And so finally he's done it. He's the best in the world. But without Ibushi by his side, how much does it actually mean? This inner conflict is only made worse when a year later,
Like, it's a cool story and everything. I love it. But in the back of my head, it's always like, it's a written story. It's like, they're not actual humans doing this. Well, they are actually, I mean, he won not because he was, like, better. He won because it was written. Think just in the back of my head, I don't know.
Omega suffers a crushing loss in the finals
Why I said it because of, yeah, I'll go back a little. I get lost in the story. I'm listening to like, oh wow, that's so cool, and then it comes from the back of my head. I hear a voice just like, but it's written. He won that because it was written in the script. He won that because the writers wanted it. Like promotion
only
wanted.
made worse when a year later Omega suffers a crushing loss in the finals of the same tournament. And afterwards, backstage, comes face to face with Ibushi for the
Oh.
first time since his betrayal. And Ibushi reaches out to comfort Omega, but Kenny cannot accept it. Things have gone too far. It's too late. And slowly, the unbreakable armor Omega has surrounded himself in begins to crack and crumble, and sensing weakness,
That was
the
it.
other
End of
members of the
days,
Bullet
but-
Club begin to turn on
Hey,
him,
Koji,
with the
what's up?
American Nightmare Cody Rhodes using his feelings for Ibushi as a weapon against him, culminating in a savage attack on Koda, only to have Omega furiously defend his former partner. This eventually leads to the Bullet Club turning on Kenny, destroying him
was
with
it-
a vicious assault, only
Roger
for
Woodlock? Yeah, I
Ibushi
don't
to
know.
run to the ring
not
and
in those
save
days.
his former partner.
Dude.
And then, in a moment that's been
Announced it.
10 years in the making, the two finally just stand in the ring and face one another. Ibushi desperate to reform their partnership, but it's just too late. Too much has happened and the scars run too deep.
Kenny's too
Omega
old.
cannot accept his former partner. Until
With the music, like.
after a story 10 years in the making, the Golden Lovers are reunited. What's so incredible
Golden?
to me about the saga of the Golden Lovers
I think he's wearing
is
their
that it's a
shirt
story
too,
that
Kami.
could only really occur in wrestling. One that's about two people who felt a
Kami is
connection
gold, I
and
think,
formed something
in
beautiful,
Japanese.
only to later be torn apart by the different directions life pulled them in, and then finally, years later, to realize what really
no, wait.
mattered. And what's
I'm thinking
more,
about something
identifying
else.
what's
Fact.
real here and what isn't is nearly
Ken?
impossible. Omega was genuinely a young wrestler who was inspired by a videotape of Ibushi. Ibushi's talent did outshine Omega, and the two were genuinely caught between their love of competing together and their aspirations as single wrestlers.
I'm curious behind
And
about
as a
behind
result,
the scenes.
there's a heart and a strife to this story that's so genuine and real. And I think at its best, that's what wrestling can be. Yes, it's fake, but that doesn't mean it can't be honest. Doesn't mean its stories can't be about real things that we can all relate to. This is why I'm still a fan,
I can't
why
relate to
so
that.
many people are, and why I think at least
Poor Shinsuke.
that professional wrestling is
Doing nothing in
fascinating.
WWE. Is that it? Nope.
Friends, thank you for joining me
Okay,
today,
this-
and particularly if you're not a fan of pro wrestling, I want to thank you for sticking around to the end of this video and giving it a chance. I really hope you got something out of it. I want to shout out the Twitter user @effingboring, whose work was a huge inspiration and source for this video, and who also has covered the story of the Golden Lovers in a far more comprehensive manner than I have here. Link in the description below. Also, huge shout out to the channel Showbuckle, whose videos on New Japan and the Golden Lovers were also a massive source for this video. A massive thank you to my own personal Bullet Club over on Patreon. This video in particular, I'd like to thank Captain Piledriver, Harris Bajwa, Cole Davies,
Okay, is there anything else? Okay. No, you can support them on Patreon, through podcast, and on follow them on Twitter if you want. All right. This was a great video, great showing what wrestling can be. It's just, I don't know, it feels like NJPW is hard to watch from outside of Japan. I'm not sure. Maybe if you're a new wrestling fan, AEW would be better to jump in, because WWE is just a what's it called, a shadow of its former self. A shell. Anyway, NXT is not too bad, but normal just doesn't make sense. Storylines come up from nowhere, wrestlers get used. The worst thing about wrestling, at least for me, is that you can see two wrestlers fight, like one, and the first wrestler beating the second one. Just try to, I'll try to comprehend that. And then after some time, they go the separate ways. The feud, as it's called, ends. And even the one who won that fight like next year could be at the bottom of the barrel for no reason. Like if it's with what happened to Triple H, I can't remember his name, his actual name. What happened to him happened for a reason. Like I mean, what happened to him, like always losing and stuff like that, happened for a reason, for a shitty reason. Shouldn't have done that. I mean, I'm talking to WWE, or what was it, WWF? 1996, right? I think it's still WWF, or maybe even something. I don't know. They shouldn't have done it to him. But anyway, he's good now, and it still earned him money, I guess. Probably hated doing that though. Still, in their eyes, there was a reason, but like some people, like Ricochet, for example, he is an amazing wrestler. Has enormous talent, the same as the one of the Golden Lovers. What the fuck was that? I can't remember names. I need time to remember names. He has enormous amount of talent. You can see how he fights. He's great. He's talented. He's agile. He's strong enough. But no, he's like nowhere to be seen. And at the top, like sometimes fighters who don't deserve shit, like they're shitty wrestlers. I don't know. Like a lot of people like Brock Lesnar, but I don't. I feel like he just been handed everything for no reason, while people have to win after time to be, or like win at the Royal Rumble to get a shot at the title. He just says, "Oh, hey, Vince McMahon, yeah, it's Brock. I want a title. Tomorrow, yeah, sure." And that's it. And next day he's a fucking champion. Just, I don't know. I don't like it. I like his persona as a monster, but I don't like how he gets a title and he goes with a title for a year because nobody can beat him, and because it's scripted, it's not believable, really. I don't know. This was a weird video for me to make, I guess. I don't know. Nah, not weird, experimental. That's how I called it before, and that's gonna keep calling it. And if people will watch this one, I'll make next reaction. Well, I'll make another reaction to the channel to the Undertaker long-term storytelling and wrestling, because I like it. I like Undertaker. He's, if not favorite, he's one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. And he's a wholesome human being behind the scenes. Oh, and I want to know if there is. No, it's too late now. I'm really ending this, but how was situation between Kenny Omega and the other guy behind the scenes? Were they best friends behind the scenes? They were on the ring, or were they just work colleagues? They probably were friends, but were they like doing anything outside of just working together? Anyway, thank anybody who watched this. I appreciate it a lot. I hope to see you next time. Goodbye. Have a great life, because one of us has to.